Diagnosing. We're going to move into prescriptions shortly. Don't forget you can join the debate via our website skynews.com, Twitter on #Sky News. You can have your say too. You can vote indeed. We're asking why are they rioting, greed or protest. Do stay with us. We'll be asking what can we do to prevent scenes like these happening again.
At Dreams, it's our biggest ever sale, with over 50% off our best ever choice of beds and bedroom furniture. And to help, there's a huge choice free till next year, and free credit on everything too. Plus this week, there's 3 for 2 on all bedroom furniture. So with over 50% off, 3 for 2 on all bedroom furniture, and a huge choice free till next year, your dream bedroom has never been more affordable. Dreams, for a great night's sleep.
Introducing BT Sunshine Deals. Get BT Total Broadband and unlimited UK calls anytime for only £16 a month. And the first 3 months are absolutely free. For an awesome broadband and calls deal this summer, call 0800 200 700 or go to bt.com/sunshine deals.
Welcome back. We've been asking why are they rioting? What should we do now to prevent a repeat of the scenes that we've seen this week? Is there anything we should be doing about our education system in particular? We're joined now from Westminster by former teacher and educationalist Dr. Tony Sewell, who's done extensive research into why black pupils in particular underachieve in British schools. A very warm welcome to you, Tony. Have these rioters been ill-served by an education system which attached too little importance to things like discipline, physical exercise and a sense of belonging and pride?
Yes, of course it has. And I think one of the key problems we have in our education system is that it really needs to get back to some, if you like, traditional values, where you're looking at an education system that is not only about academics. Academics is important, but it's also kind of a social education for children. I'm a kind of a great believer in the old traditional English education system, and I think it does work. I think it works on a level where there is a lot of discipline for children, where we're thinking really about how we actually get students, in the sense, belonging to the school itself. I always feel that there's a sense in our system where the students are not really believing in how the school works. They're outside of it. And it's sort of something where they're allowed to get away. It's prizes for all. There's no sense of challenge. I run a charity called Generating Genius, and we feel that we have to do that on the extended school level, where we give students that real challenge that they need, not only academically but also socially. And I mean, this is just really a manifestation of some of that. That said, let me make it very clear. I'm not going to be here standing up being any apologist for any of that crime, that despicable behaviour that went on. And I hope you will not associate me with any of this in the terms of excusing that.
No, absolutely not. And you make that absolutely clear. Give us a sense, if you would, when this all comes out in the wash, how many of those who end up being convicted, you imagine, will have been excluded from school? How many of those, particularly young people, are actually not in education?
I think there's a high percentage of those you saw rioting would have been excluded from school, but you know, as we saw, it's a cross section. But you know, the exclusion from schools isn't really the problem. I mean, that's the manifestation really of what's gone wrong. I do think schools are not supported enough by the community, by parents enough, and there's a lot of blame around teachers. I've always defended teachers, and people have attacked me for this. But I do think that the real issue is to do with the family, and actually, in a sense, the position of the father. We look at boys, and you know what? The issue for us, I think, is getting a situation where we learn how to raise boys. And one of the problems we have in our society is that we don't sure how that process from bringing a boy to a man works. And we're not really clear about that, and we've forgotten how to do that. In our ancestors would have known exactly what to do. They know that really, if you don't kind of get hold and put law lines around those male children in particular.
Tell you what, Tony,
then,
we've got a panel of guests here who are desperate to talk about boundaries and milestones and rites of passage, but we appreciate your expertise, certainly as a former teacher. Thanks a lot for joining us from Westminster. Tony Sewell there. Well, many people have blamed a vacuum of moral standards for this week's lawlessness. Where do faith groups stand on what has happened? We're joined now from Tottenham by Pastor Mims Obonge, who has led marches against gun crime and has been a regular visitor indeed to Downing Street to advise on youth issues there. Pastor, welcome to you. I'd like to start, if I can,
thank you,
with those images we saw of a Malaysian student who was initially injured. He was then helped to his feet and promptly mugged. It was a perverse inversion of the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, I mean, I was disgusted. I was shocked at those images. And I think that reflects something that David Cameron spoke about. He said we're no longer dealing with a broken Britain, but we're dealing with a sick society. But then if we're dealing with a society that's sick, then we need to resource the healing of that society. And I think that's what we've got to spend a lot of time to unpick. What are the issues that have allowed a young people get to this point? Because by no means can we condone what we saw on the streets of Tottenham and the streets of London and the streets of the country. It's totally unacceptable. But at the same time, we've got to get to the core issues, because to arrest them, to put them into prisons and lock them up for so many weeks or months, they'll come back out. And if we don't look at what the core issues are, and we don't have a program of support for some of these young people, we're making a gross mistake. We're not providing a holistic response, so this never ever happens to us again.
Pastor, we saw one woman in her early 20s today. She'd had a pang of conscience, she said. She'd got home, she saw the TV that had been looted, she decided to hand her chips into the cops, if you like. A rare outbreak of conscience, some might say. Talk to us about conscience. I mean, it's once gone, it's a very difficult thing to recapture in a society, isn't it?
It is, but I think that when people understand some of the challenges that happened on the high street, when I went over to see a mother whose home had been burnt to cinders, she had no home contents insurance, her baby nearly got killed in the fire. And mothers begin to see that their children have brought in looted goods, knowing that some folks have been killed as a result of these riots. Your conscience demands that you return those goods. And I think what we need to do is call on parents, return the goods if you can. I'm not saying hand your children in. I can't do that. That's a far cry. I can't do that. But let's start returning back and rebuilding our communities. Let's start rebuilding our society. And let's stop this violence. Because you see, in the pursuit of justice, unfortunately, what has happened, injustice has prevailed. And you know, when we speak about a broken Britain, I believe now Britain is broke. And we have so many cuts. In Haringey alone, 75% cuts in our youth services. We need help in all these societies.
Pastor, we really appreciate your contribution tonight. Thanks very much indeed. I want to turn it back to our panel for some closing thoughts at some length, if possible. Ruth, let's think about what Tony Sewell told us. As a former teacher, he says, and maybe it's a little simplistic, that it's not all the fault of teachers and schools, but a big part of the problem.
Not at all, actually. I left teaching. I loved teaching people. I taught in a secondary school near Moss Side in Manchester. I left that job because the curriculum, the way that teaching was, it became very dull. It became dull for the children, dull for me. You're putting them through a sausage factory of education. I think we train bright people to go into education, then we don't allow them to be individuals. We don't respect teachers and allow them to teach. I really felt sorry for a lot of my pupils having to go through the dirge of the curriculum sometimes. But I just wanted to make another point, which is throughout this debate we're talking a lot about the boys. It's become very male focused. We're talking about the lack of father figures and role models, which is a key component. However, in my work, I see a lot of young girls that are in complete crisis. They might not have been the ones putting their feet through the windows, but the girls are in crisis too. And what I'm very worried about is after these riots, all the focus is going to be on interventions for boys, and we're going to leave those girls kind of spiralling out of control. And if the girls are out of control, the communities are not going to be strong either. I want to see an equal level of compassion showed towards the boys and the girls, and focus on them, because the boys get a lot of attention already.
Peter Hitchens, I want to talk to you about what the pastor had to say. You've written a book book about the loss of faith in Western society, and Britain in particular, and how that impacts on our culture. What did you make of what the pastor had to say? Is there a position of faith here, and conscience in particular, which has now disappeared entirely?
Well, there is no basis on which most people being brought up in this country can now judge between right and wrong. So we're left with ad hoc ethics, which is practical atheism. There is no reason to believe that anything is particularly right or particularly wrong, except insofar as it suits you, and that's what we've got. It seems to me to be a very strong argument in favour of the other thing, but that is right at the bottom of the huge pile of mistakes which our society has made. Though you might well say that it was at the foundation of them, but they have all been based on the idea that you could get away with society without a fundamental moral position to back it up. The legal position falls, the education system falls, the family falls, all the things which hold up a society and a civilization fall, and then you get a night like Saturday night and Sunday night, and you suddenly see, revealed as in a flash of lightning, just how far your society has decayed. Though people like David still deny there's anything wrong. Well, the moment that the real purpose of this event, and if it does any good at all, will be when all the useless liberals and social democrats who have mistakenly wrenched our society out of true for the past 50 years admit that their policies are responsible and that they are wrong. Because they are wrong, and they have done immense damage. And they're also in control, and if they won't admit nothing good will come of it.
Bring back God and make everybody marry and abolish the divorce laws, and we would all be fine, Peter.
Yes, well, I didn't say any of that. I didn't say any of that.
Well, this is the implication. It's a kind of fantasy of taking the country back.
It's difficult, but
no.
It's difficult that you wouldn't like it.
It's not only difficult. It's unimaginable, and people don't want it. However, there are some very specific very specific problems that we could begin to address. And we talked about them in the context of interventions for children who are at risk and who will actually have formed probably the bulk of the people who we're talking about in terms of the rioting, and quite a lot of the other problems that you were talking about, probably the people both who murder and get murdered on the streets of London. And there is a vast amount more that we could do for them. We need to reparent a whole lot of young kids, people
we're in danger of going slightly over old territory here. Let's bring in Sheldon again. Let's talk about this idea of relativism. All lifestyles are absolutely equal. No one's better than anybody else. One way of life is no better than any other.
Well, some of the things that Peter's done, I have to agree. It's Peter's, right, isn't it? Peter's your name, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Some of the things he was saying about faith, he was talking about faith, correct? Mm-hmm. And I think the problem has been, and I'm going to talk specifically from a certain point, a community, which is the black community. One of the things that has been missing, and which underpinned us when we first came to this country, was the fact of our Christian faith. And what's happened, I've seen over the last 3-4 decades, how that has eroded in this country here, where we've moved from
the God-fearing Windrush generation.
Exactly, we've moved from that into a generation which comes back to your point about lawlessness, where the moral background, which faith underpins morality, where once that has been eroded, we have now a generation of young kids, not just black kids, but white kids as well, where faith doesn't play a part in their life. And so now we're left with whether to, what's going to control what's going to be their line that they're going to draw to see right and wrong. And I think that sometimes when you're in a society where you can see how faith played a major contributing factor in holding a community together, and now that is eroded and you see that community fall apart, you'll have to question.
When you lose faith in a society, you end up with plastic bullets and water cannons.
Ruth, let me just bring Ruth.
Well, you wouldn't agree with it.
Ruth, can we just reflect on what Tony Sewell had to say? I billed him as somebody who'd done a lot of research on black kids. Actually, if you look at the figures, the white working class have worse results in the 3 R's, in basic arithmetical and literacy skills, than young black men.
Although they're not excluded as much, which is an important point.
Most important.
However, I would like to say that in terms of education, I feel that young working class kids, whatever their colour, are failing. Now, is that the same as being failed? They're failing, and we're not looking at imaginative ways of maybe changing the curriculum and keeping them involved in the education system.
We've got less than 90 seconds left. I want a really pithy answer from all of you, if possible. Peter, I'll start with you. Are we going to see more rioting in coming weeks and months?
I don't know about coming weeks or months, but definitely in the future there will be more of this. Yes, there is nothing to prevent it.
David?
I think not, but I think we could see a spike in things like on street robberies and so on.
Sheldon?
I think if we don't start looking at the aspirations of this country and the faith part of it and getting the churches back involved in people's lives, and also looking at teenage pregnancy, looking at apprenticeships and the education part of things, I think we will definitely see something along these lines.
Ruth, you've travelled furthest to get here. You came all the way down from Manchester. We'll give you the final word.
Thank you very much. I think if we need to stop accusing people of being bleeding heart liberals if they're trying to look at the causes of this and try and find some real solutions.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, thanks to all our panel members tonight. I hope we've managed to introduce a little bit of light onto a complicated debate. I think we can say with conviction that there are no simple answers, certainly to the problems caused